Boatworks Today is a viewer-supported show. To learn more on how you can get involved and watch extended ad-free versions of these videos, please visit our website, boatworkstoday.com, and click on the top of the heading where it says Support this show. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all having a great weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today, and in this video, I'm actually going to be doing something that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, which is basically put together a display panel with a number of different varnishes so I can get an actual side-by-side comparison looking at different gloss levels and color tone and just ease of application. Now, I did something similar to this a few weeks ago back over on Patreon, but it wasn't quite the same because I was using a number of different smaller pieces. And visually, comparing one to the other side by side, it wasn't a fair comparison because they were all different cuts of teak, and it wasn't like for like. So this, I'm going to have it on a single panel. This is an a sapele, or ribbon stripe mahogany veneered plywood. And this is a scrap that I had left over that I've been kicking around the shop for a number of years. So I figured, well, let's put it to good use, and I'll use this as my test panel. And when it's all said and done, I'll be able to hang it up on the wall and look at it and admire it, I guess. I mean, who doesn't like looking at a nice varnished piece of wood? So with that said, let's get started with the prep. So for this display, I'm going to be using 4 of the different types of finishes that are offered through Total Boat, and then as well as a rubbed effect from Varnish. And yes, everybody pronounces it Epiphanes, but if you call and talk to them, they will correct you. It's Varnish, as well as a satin semi-gloss, satin varnish from Pettit. Now, these 3 over here are going to be high gloss. These 3 over here are going to range anywhere from a semi-gloss to rubbed effect to an actual just straight up matte flat finish. Now, all of the 4 finishes offered through Total Boat, these are all what I like to call like rapid build varnishes, meaning that as soon as the surface is no longer tacky, you can come back and recoat without having to sand in between. Whereas with these 2, through the Varnish and the Pettit, these are essentially 1 coat per day, and then they also require sanding in between coats. So to get started, I'm going to section off 6 strips on this panel using just regular old masking tape, and then each strip will be its own little brand of varnish. So So it is a few days later, and off camera, I applied 2 more coats over everything. And I didn't bother recording it because honestly, if you see me do the first coat, well, you've pretty much seen me do all 3. So the 4 finishes from Total Boat were not sanded at all in between coats, whereas the Pettit and the Varnish, they were sanded in between. I think I came back and scuffed each of these samples up with 400 grit paper. And also, none of these samples were thinned. I mean, these were applied right out of the can or in Halcyon's case, right out of the bag. And to be honest, really none of these need thinner. I mean, with the very first coat being the exception. I mean, you do want to have a more or less a sealing coat to go in and kind of really soak into the wood so you get good adhesion. But for the most part, none of these actually need any kind of a reducer, for the second and third and in successive coats. The one exception would be the 2 lusts, from Total Boat. These are much thicker than all of the other finishes. Now, I would probably go ahead and reduce these at least 20% after the first coat is done. For your first coat with all of these, I would basically cut them essentially at a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, as far as what reducers to use, for the most part, like Total Boat has their own version of their brushing thinner, as does Varnish and Pettit. But for the most part, all of the reducers for all of these finishes are essentially naphtha. I know Epiphanius and the Total Boat ones are almost exclusively naphtha, whereas Petit does have a kind of a naphtha mineral spirits blend. But I have gone and used both of these two finishes with just straight mineral spirits, and it works just fine. A little bit slower cure, but it works just fine. Now, again, the one exception being Halcyon. Halcyon is the only sample out of all these that actually gets cut with water. So that's kind of cool. Now, when you're looking at the appearance of each of these finishes, I mean, there is some differences here. I mean, some of these finishes are much more of an amber color, while some of these ones in here have more of a brownish color. And if I had to put these in order, I would say the Gleam is probably the most amber, followed by the Lust, and then surprisingly the Petit, the V975. The reason I'm a little bit surprised by this is the Petit is somewhat of like a satin or a semi-gloss finish. And usually when you start to get into more of like the semi-glosses and the matte finishes, the flatteners that they the flatteners that they add into this muddy the appearance somewhat. But for the most part, you know, the Petit actually has a very, very nice amber color. Now, when you get into these three finishes, the Epiphanius, the Lust Matte, as well as the Halcyon, these are ranging anywhere from, say, like a semi-gloss to an actual flat matte. And the flattest of these finishes being the Lust Matte. Now, just real quick, something I want to kind of elaborate on here. Now, in this demo, I just applied the Lust Matte directly over bare wood. Now, typically, that is not how you'd want to do this. Normally, it's not just with this particular Lust finish, it's with any kind of a flat or matte finish. You want to do all of your build coats using an actual high gloss, because that's what gives you your clarity. And then your final coat, maybe two coats, being your semi-gloss or your flat finish. Now, the reason you want to do that is because in order to get this kind of a dulled appearance, they add what are called flatteners. And if you just go in like I did here with applying a matte finish directly to bare wood, what happens is the oils and the solvents get absorbed into the wood, and the flatteners themselves just end up resting up on the surface. Now, over time and exposure to sun, those flatteners will kind of turn kind of chalky on you. That was, the reason I did it this way is because I wanted to see how flat this matte finish actually was, and it's pretty darn flat. Something that I found was kind of interesting. Now, this one and these are both Lust varnishes, but this one being the gloss, this one being the matte. Now, personally, this would be a good finish for an interior, but it's maybe a little bit flat for my taste. So because these are the same line of varnishes, what you can do is you can actually blend these. So instead of you can use, say, half gloss, half matte, which will give you a semi-gloss finish. So that's kind of cool. You can kind of dial it into whatever kind of gloss or sheen that it is you're looking for. Now, real briefly, I want to go over some of the where and whens you might want to be using each of these finishes. Now, for the most part, your high gloss finishes are almost exclusively going to be used on an exterior. You don't really see them used too much on an interior, just because it's a little bit too harsh on the eyes. I mean, constantly having glares from the sun and different lights and stuff, it just becomes a little bit obnoxious. Whereas, the satins and the semi-glosses, those are primarily used on an interior. Now, the one finish here that is different than all the rest is the Halcyon. Now, in my opinion, they do market it as a high gloss finish, and I'm sure if you had enough coats built up, it probably would be a high gloss finish. But after 3 coats, it's got a very, very nice kind of a semi-gloss appearance to it, and it doesn't make the wood look like plastic. And for an interior use, again, one of the things I want to kind of point out is that you reduce this with water. I don't know that I'd say that it's an actual water-based finish, but you do reduce it with water. And the reason that's kind of an important thing for me is because when you're working in an interior, you're dealing with odors, and there really isn't an easy way to get rid of those, the solvents that are flashing off. Now, the Halcyon is the least stinky of the 3, and it really doesn't have much of a smell at all. Whereas all of these other finishes, they have a pretty strong solvent smell. So if you're going to be using these over in a large area in an interior, or at least in any kind of an enclosed space, make sure you're wearing your respirator. The fumes may get to you. So now, as far as the hardness of each of these finishes, I would say that the 2 hardest finishes on this sample are the Epiphanius Rubbed Effect as well as the Lust Matte. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are primarily going to be dedicated for interior use. And I mean, you're gonna get a lot more scuffing whether you're putting down your dishes, plates, people sitting down, or if you have a chair or a backrest or something that's varnished. It makes a lot more sense that your interior or your semi-gloss or satin finishes are gonna be a little bit more of a harder finish. Now, going over the rest of these samples, I would say probably the Halcyon would be the next hardest, followed by the Petit, the Gleam, and then lastly, the Lust Gloss. Now, with the exception of the Lust Gloss, all of these finishes are very, very close. They're all a fairly hard finish. The exception, like I mentioned, being the Lust Gloss. Now, this is a finish that is pretty thick out of the can. So I may have put this on too thick, which is, after 3 or 4 days, it still feels a little soft and tender. But I have used this finish on, other kind of side projects in the past, and after a few days, it does get as hard as the rest. But as far as 3 days into it, the Lust Gloss is the least hard, at least at the moment. Now, as far as my personal preference, I think for an exterior, again, personally, I think I would probably lean towards the Gleam, just because I like the color. I like that amber color, and it's got good clarity to it. It's a fast build product. You don't have to sand in between coats, and right out of the can, it's a good viscosity. Now, not to take anything away from any of these other finishes, and as well as some others that weren't included in this sample, but personally, as far as what I have included here, I would lean towards the Gleam for the exterior. Now, as far as for an interior finish, really, I think any of these would work as long as they're toned down on their gloss. Again, I personally prefer more of like a satin semi-gloss finish. I think a flat matte by itself is maybe a little bit too dull for my personal taste, but really any of these can be blended. I think any of them would make good options for an interior finish. Now, one here that does, again, talking about an interior, have a slight advantage. I would say it would be the Halcyon, just because it seems to have a lot less of a stink factor. So if you have any refinishing coming up with any of your projects, I hope this video helped to kind of narrow down some of the options that are out there, because honestly, there's quite a few to pick from. So if you have any questions, comments, or experience with any of these products, please let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And if, again, that whole like, subscribe thing. And as always, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.